I'm in the same room with, let me mute. Yeah, I'm in the same room. He will introduce himself, but our third colleague is Eugene. He's not here with us, but he's a professor at the University of Valdosta in Georgia, in the United States. And I'm Seidu Sofo. Dr. Thompson and I are Southeast Missouri State University, and I'm in teacher education, specifically physical education pedagogy. And we're trying to see how colleges of education can target interventions so that they can help students in terms of gaining some competency before they graduate from the college. So I'll allow Professor Thompson to introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Emmanuel Thompson. I'm a professor in actuarial science and statistics. So yeah, from Southeast Missouri State University. So thank you for coming.
And this is the outline. All right, as we know, learners tend to accept challenges that are very difficult, and then they also try to build capabilities if they have the feeling of competence. And then teachers who take their students' perspectives will be more likely to be responsive to students' need for autonomy. And then also a growth mindset has been shown to have a significant effect on students' motivation, learning, and overall academic success. And going down to classroom climate, it tends to result in improved academic performance due to its ability to promote belonging and engagement among students. The purpose of the study is to examine the predictors of perceived competence among College of Education students in Ghana. Research questions. 1, what are the levels of perceived competence among College of Education teacher trainees? 2, what are the predictors of perceived competence among College of Education teacher trainees? Now, we use 3 scales, but the participants were 516 teacher trainees, 32 of them were male, 78 female, from 2 colleges of education in Ghana. 1, we use in the instrumentation, we use the Perceived Competence Scale, which is a 4-item, 7-point Likert scale. And then we modified Dweck's Mindset Scale into 14 items for 2 subscales, 7 items for each subscale, student learning and teacher ability. And then the last scale was Classroom Climate Scale. It's a modified 6-item scale that we use on a 5-point Likert scale.
Yeah, for this study, we use 2 classes of variables, okay? The first, we have the response variable, which is perceived competence. And then we have a series of predictor variables. So for instance, the demographics, we have sex, marital status, age, and region. And then we have another composite variable, growth mindset, which comprises of student learning and then teaching ability. Then we have classroom climate and then area of certification. So because we want to depart from traditional statistical modeling approach, where people normally use p-values to say this particular variable is significant or not, we chose a different approach. And for that matter, we did some slight data pre-processing. So for instance, the perceived competence and then the classroom climate, we average the items on their individual scales. And then also for student learning and teaching ability, we obtained a derived variable. We obtained derived variables by summing their items. And like I said, we departed from traditional statistics. So because of that, we divided our data into training and testing. Generally, people call this the machine learning method. Okay, so for statistical and machine learning techniques, it's always traditional to first do some descriptives to understand what is going on with the data. So we calculated frequencies, percentages, the mean, standard deviation, and quartiles. Then we move on to the machine learning method, which is actually a predictive method. So we use a non-parametric supervised learning technique, which is used for prediction. Okay, it's called regression tree. It's very simple and very interpretable. And in using that method, there are two steps procedure we followed. One is model selection, because a variety of models will be created, but one of them is optimal. So we use this method called tenfold cross-validation to identify the most optimal model, or we say the most optimal tree. And based on that, the second step, we perform model evaluation. Is just to assess the predictive performance of the identified model from model selection. And we use two metrics to quantify the performance. We use the mean, the root mean square error, and then the mean absolute error. And we use that based on another data set that was not used in creating the tree. We call that the test set. So I would say for the results, we have our first table, which shows the participants' demographics and then the descriptive statistics. In the interest of time, I won't just go through all this, but the most important thing on this table is the perceived competence, which served as the response variable. So on the average, we have 5.55. which just means on the average, the participants had high scores. And if you want to know about the various components, just look at the bottom part of the table. It shows the number, percentage, the mean, plus or minus, standard deviation, the median, and then the first quartile and third quartile. Okay. Then we also have table 2, which is similar to table 1. But like I said before, we are departing from regular statistical analysis to do a machine learning type of analysis. So we need a training data, which is just 80% approximately of the entire data set. So we just repeated the same descriptives just to make sure that the training data distribution matches to a very large extent the distribution in the overall data. And again, we can just look at the PC, which is the perceived competence. The average is still around 5.56. It didn't depart that much from the overall data set. And it's also on the average very high among those participants. Okay. So in terms of our results, so like I said, the regression tree, we first did model selection. So prior to that, we created a very giant tree. And you will see the tree, I mean, not the entire giant tree, but a much more improved version of that. But originally, we created a giant tree. And normally the trees will have something we call terminal nodes. So the giant tree had 14 terminal nodes, and it used 6 of the predictor variables that we had, okay? And that tree is not optimal. It means it's not the best. So we performed the tenfold cross-validation. And the chart you see on this side actually tracks the errors that we make, assuming we fit different models of different complexity. And the complexity comes in the size of the tree. We call tree size. So you can see as the tree size increases, to some extent, when we got to the tree size of 9, we were able to get the point where the error looks almost very small. So it means that is where we can, output that model at that step to serve as our, I would say, optimal tree or optimal model, okay? So based on that, we arrive at our optimal model, which we call the prune tree or the prune model. which looks much more smaller than a model with 14 terminal nodes. And after model selection, we perform model evaluation. It means we computed some error metrics. And for that selected model, which is the prune tree, we got the root mean square error to be 1.44, and then the mean absolute error to be 2.08. Now, this is the tree, okay, the optimal tree. So clearly, this is how we interpret this tree. So you look at the variable which is splitted, the variable which splits first. So that tells you that is the most important variable, because that is what the model considers to be very important in its splitting. Then you move down the tree. The second important variable is this variable, how do you call it? The classroom climate, okay? And as you move down the tree, then the degree of importance of the variables decreases. So that is how we were able to perform variable selection to come to the conclusion that based on importance ranking, year is the most influential variable, because among all the candidate variables used, that was the first variable that the optimal tree identified to split on. Then the second most important variable, which we term strong predictor, you can see that's the classroom climate. And then we have TA, which is TA, teaching ability, and then age in that order. We also have another variable, which is student learning and then area of study, but the method did not select them, which means that they don't have high predictive ability. So because of that, we can assume they are less important. So based on that, we arrive at these 4 variables, and instead of just doing the regular p-value approach. So I'll say in conclusion, majority of the participants studied had high levels of perceived competence, growth mindset, and then classroom climate. And we also saw that from the tenfold cross-validation approach, the model with tree size of 9, that level of complexity happens to be the best. And in terms of ranking the importance of the variables studied in terms of the split order, we found year in program, classroom climate, teaching ability, and age were those predictors given by the prune model. So generally, I would say in understanding of the nature of growth mindset and classroom climate would assist teacher educators to identify and implement effective strategies to prepare competent teachers. So these are the references. And thank you for your audience. And at this point, we are free and open for questions, suggestions, ideas, because this is a work in progress.